Okay, the biggest request was for an explanation on domain and range. And I also had a few other requests just to do some problems. Typically, this one was the one most requested, this type of problem. So we'll go through this problem and talk more about domain and range, and we'll see some of those other issues you requested demonstrated too. On day 2 of your vacation, you have $143 in spending money. On day 5, you're down to $57.50. Assuming your spending habits are linearly related, write an equation that models the situation. So like I've said, you should always look to see what are they giving me. Are they giving me the slope? And in this case, it kind of seems like it would probably be how much you're spending, like dollars per day or something. And they didn't tell me that, but they did give me a bunch of numbers. And so I see that the day 2 goes with this, and day 5 goes with this. And so those are paired up. And so that just makes me think of ordered pairs. Depending on what day it is, the independent variable, depending on what day it is, that will tell you your y value, how much money you have left. On day 5, we've got $57.50. And it just says to write a linear equation, but basically, no matter what it would ask you, you'd probably start out this problem in the same way. If you're given 2 points, what can you find? Given 2 points, you can find the slope. And remember, the slope stands for the rate, or the rate of change. And so given an x and a y and an x and a y, that just seems like the most natural formula that you could use is the y minus the y and the x minus the x. So let's try that. This will give me my rise, and the x will give me my run. Just make sure you do the same order both times. So since I went top minus bottom, I did top minus bottom. For what I mean by that is by these ordered pairs. And so my rise is 85.5, and my run is -3. And if you just divide that out, I get 28.5. You know, eventually I'll ask you to interpret that. So can you identify what the label is on x values and on y values? The x values were days, and the y values were amount of money you have. And so when you subtract the y's up here, that top number is your dollars, and when you subtract the x's, your number down here is your days. So this answer right here, the units would be dollars per day. Oh, and I just realized I missed a negative sign. That's huge. Jeez. All right. So that would have been -28.5. And actually, I want you to mention that if I asked you to describe that. What does the negative signify? That would stand for that you were spending. So maybe just use that word indicating if it's positive or negative. So we're at the point in our equation now where we know the m, but we don't know the b. And I think most of you have figured this out, that kind of the protocol for this is that we're going to pick an x, y. You can pick either one that you know. I'm going to pick the one without decimals because that's how I roll. So I am going to temporarily plug the y value in and the x. And that'll allow me to find b. Now that I discovered that b is 200, I can write out my complete equation. And if you ever get stuck on what that 200 or what that b value stands for, a couple things to remember. The first thing is that b stands for y-intercept. So your y-intercept will always be measured in the same units that your y values are measured in. It also might help you to write that as an ordered pair. 0, 200 would be the y-intercept. So you can then even use that to describe on day 0 of your vacation, you started with $200. And now by popular request, we're talking domain and range. So domain, again, is going to be talking about the x values, In this example, we're talking about days, right? And our range, y values, which is dollars. So when we think about days being on vacation, you can't go on vacation for negative days, so I would probably say that x has to be greater than, I suppose greater than 0. You wouldn't go on a 0-day vacation, you'd at least go on a 0.1 day vacation. So I would say x greater than 0 for the domain would make sense. One other thing to think about though is maybe I should be writing it like this. Is there a maximum number of days that I can be going on vacation? I'll think about that in a minute. Let's talk about the money, the y values. Well, now that I know that I started with $200, maybe I can say, and I'm spending it, maybe I can say that the range is going to be less than $200. And I said less than, not equal to, because if you didn't go on vacation at all, you would still have $200, but we're talking about how many days you've been on vacation. So I decided just to say less than 200. If I'm going on vacation at all, I'm going to be spending something. But then again, maybe there's a lower bound. And honestly, I think it might be like when you run out of money, you go home, right? So maybe we should cut that off at 0 for our domain. Yeah, or for our range, sorry. So yeah, I think that we would go home once we spent all of our money. So that would be sensible for the range. But that means that I'm going to have to cut off my vacation at some point too. So there would be an upper bound in this situation. And this actually answers somebody else's question. If your y-intercept has an x value that was 0, if I ever ask you about an x-intercept, then the y value is 0. Because if you think about on a graph, x-intercept values would be something comma 0. So if I ever ask you for an x-intercept, go ahead and just plug in a 0 for the y value. I'm getting about 7.02. So that means that after 7.02 days on vacation, that's day number 7.02, this would be my dollars. I would have $0 left, right? And that's why I'm thinking if my range is starting at 200 and then dwindling down to 0, we probably should also cut off our vacation at some point. So the $200 stood for day 0, and when do I have to go home? At day 7.02. Maybe I should have just rounded that to 7. And I guess if I'm allowing myself to have equal to $0, then I should allow myself to have equal to 7.02 days of vacation. So again, for domain and range, if there is no upper bound, feel free to just write your domain like this. But if there is an upper bound, if it has to be between something and something, then you would write your domain more like this. And so I think we've decided to go with cutting off our vacation at 7.02 days. I hope that helped a little bit. My main advice is to always keep those units in mind. If we're talking about x values, think of days. If we're talking about y values or y-intercepts, think about money. And again, for the slope, if it's y over x for rise over run, that would be dollars per day, and that'll help you make sense of everything, I think.